Boy, there are many ways you know when it's college football season. When this guy starts joining us every Monday, you know it's college football season. Presented by MyBookie.ag. Welcome in, Joel Klatt. What is up, Klatt?
Hey, how are you guys doing? What's going on today?
Man, phenomenal. It's I know you live in Southern California. There's a little I wouldn't call it a nip in the air here in Birmingham, but it's cool. A little cooler than normal. We've got football being played. It's awesome.
I think, Klatt, we have a new camera angle for you. Did you slide a little bit in the room, a little closer to that far wall?
I did. I got a whole new desk set up. I'm finishing it up here in the next couple of days. But yeah, it's a whole new desk. You guys will get a little bit of a different angle, which is unique. You don't get the same angle as the show, so I did that for you.
Oh,
right?
wow, just for us.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. It looks good. It's a good looking set, good looking angle.
Hey, by the way, how are you guys? What's going on? It's great to talk.
Terrific.
You know us. You know us. Always good this time of year.
Better than Mike Norvell. No, but if I ask you, Klatt, I mean, what is the bigger problem? Because we talked about this. Like going into the weekend, we were like, Haynes King is actually the better quarterback. You know, Jordan Travis, there is a downgrade from Jordan Travis to DJU. But if you're a Florida State fan and you're watching this game, are you more concerned with what seemed to be lack of confidence in DJU from Mike Norvell? Are you more concerned in that situation, or the fact that this was a Florida State defense that on the edge last year beat everybody and they were able to attack the quarterback? 0 sacks this past weekend. And I know a lot of that is Haynes King is so athletic, but it just looked a little different from the defense as well.
And maybe style of offense. You know, I mean, Georgia Tech was running the ball so effectively. Two things jumped out to me watching that game. Number one was DJ has not progressed as a quarterback. You know, what we saw when he stepped in for Trevor Lawrence against Notre Dame is what we continue to see. And it's a guy that doesn't see it all that well, you know, you can tell. And then there is some apprehension in his ability to just let it rip down the field. You know, he's got some wide receivers open. The times that they did protect him, he wasn't able to connect down the field. And that's going to have to develop. That's going to have to get better. There's no question. I thought what was actually more worrisome for Florida State was the fact that their defensive line, it wasn't about the fact that they didn't get pressure on Haynes King. It's that they got blown off the ball so many different times, just moved. And Georgia Tech is running untouched into the second and third level. That's worrisome because, you know, all due respect to Georgia Tech, I think that they're going to see some better running attacks. You know, there's going to now. I don't think the ACC is ultimately all that deep. Having said that, though, like that's more worrisome to me. You cannot lose the line of scrimmage by that amount to Georgia Tech in week one when you're supposedly mad and you're out there to prove a point, and they got manhandled at the line of scrimmage. To me, that's my takeaway. Everyone's going to point at DJU. Everyone's going to worry about the quarterback and what happened there. That's fixable. Honestly, it's fixable. Even though that we've seen kind of the same things from him during the course of his career, what tends to be not fixable is when you got tackles that just get their butts kicked, snap in and snap out, because that line of scrimmage was just getting shoved down the field.
I know they may have chose to play at that same pace that Georgia Tech was playing to limit the possessions. I don't know if that was Mike Norvell's plan, but I know in the SMU game, they didn't play as fast as I thought they wanted to play or in the past they used to play. Do you think the in-helmet communication actually slowed down the pace teams a little bit? Is there a chance that Rhett Lashley calling in plays and talking to the court? I mean, so many times it seems like everybody was not getting to the line until after the 15 seconds it was cut off. Is there a chance in-helmet communications can slow people down?
It's a great question. I think it depends on the mechanics that you want to use. So if you want to say like, okay, we're done with signals, we're done with the big poster boards, and we're just going to communicate to the quarterback and he's going to communicate to the rest of the offense, that's going to slow you down by a significant margin. Because think about it, like you could communicate to all 11 like that through signs and poster boards. Now you're trying to just say audibly, generally speaking, can be a long play call That person then has to then play a game of telephone and communicate it to everybody else. Then they have to line up. Then you've got to execute the snap. That's going to take longer. Now, is it safer? Yes, ultimately it is. I would imagine that some of these teams are going to have a varied mechanics in terms of how they're calling plays. If they want to go fast, they need to return to some of the signals. If they want to slow it down, then they can go back to the helmet audio. But what I think would be beneficial, in particular for quarterbacks, is that you retain some sort of hybrid where you're getting everyone lined up right away, and then you can get to the line of scrimmage while you're talking to the quarterback and he's looking at what's in front of him. And you can say, this is the coverage they're in. This is the play that we're going to run. Communicate to the offensive line. And you've got that ability to communicate while he's looking at the defense. But if you slow it down and you give him the play, now it's kind of old school, where he's got to go up and he's got to be a big boy and kind of identify everything there. But yeah, it's a good question. I'm a fan of the helmet communication. I think that it's going to be better. But it could slow people down depending on how they want to do it.
Joel Klatt joins us this time each week, courtesy of MyBookie.ag. Code next round when you sign on at MyBookie.ag to get that bonus. You can see Klatt and Gus and the All-American Girl Saturday for the big noon kickoff. Almost Heaven, West Virginia. You'll hear that song once or twice. Klatt.
Oh boy. I can't wait. A little country road. Let's go.
Yeah.
They are going to be pinned at noon. I mean, it don't matter what game time it is. Those Mountaineers are going to come out in force.
Penn State an 8.5-point favorite in this game, but it feels like a
it's coming down.
Yeah,
they were like a 2-touchdown favorite.
Yeah, I mean that has dropped, hasn't it? At MyBookie,
it's still high to me though, Joel. I don't understand this because I thought one of the untalked about stories last year was Neil Brown on this incredibly hot seat. He had the shortest odds to lose his job a year ago today. They win 9 games. Garrett Green. I was going to ask you this. Like when you look at the quarterbacks, Drew Aller, only turned the football over twice last year, was very, very good in that regard. But the more dangerous quarterback's Garrett Green, right?
Listen, based off of last year, yes. Drew Aller, when you took a look at like his average depth of pass is like 115th in the country, right? There's very little explosive play from the offense of Penn State a year ago that would strike fear in you. Meanwhile, West Virginia had the number 1 rushing offense in the Power 5. I think that would surprise a lot of people when I say that. Last year, West Virginia had the number 1 rushing offense in the Power 5. They win 9 games. Now, on its face, all of those things are true. As soon as you start to peel back the onion, I mean, just a few layers, you'll see that when West Virginia faced anybody of consequence, they faced 3 opponents that ended up being ranked at the end of the year. They lost badly in those games. Penn State, meanwhile, the only teams they struggle with are Ohio State and Michigan. In fact, they win by an average of about 40-12 in all games other than Michigan and Ohio State the last 2 years. They're 21-1 in games that are not Michigan and Ohio State. Penn State is an elite top 10 team. And West Virginia, I think, had the benefit of playing a schedule that wasn't all that tough, and now they're going to see a very difficult slate week in and week out. In fact, you look at what they've got in the month of October. They've got 4 straight games. They're going to have to go at Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, at Arizona. And that's after a bye on September 28th, which is coming off a game in which they've got to host Kansas. So now all of a sudden, like, this is a schedule that has some depth and some teeth to it. West Virginia is a really good team. I think that Coach Brown did a phenomenal job a year ago. I'm really excited to see Donaldson and Jaheim White, this running back duo. There's no doubt Green is a solid player, but let's not fall into the trap that Drew Aller is a bad player. He led the Big Ten in touchdowns. He only had 2 interceptions. He's a first-year starter, and he ended up in the top 10. His only 2 losses were Michigan and Ohio State. Guys, if you were to say for any first-year starter in college football, outside of teams like Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State, would you take that quarterback play? The answer is yes. If he takes a step forward, we could be seeing a team in Penn State that could finish in the top 8, top 7, potentially, and maybe most likely host a playoff game.
Brown is singing, so I'll go Georgia, Georgia. Do they? They're
not
number
how it
one.
goes.
They're not number one in your poll. I think you had Ohio State. Is that correct on your poll? Your ranking?
It was, but I
Yeah.
mean, 1A, 1B. I
Yeah.
mean, those two are the best in the country, I think.
Are we sleeping a little bit on how close that game can be, Clemson and Georgia? Because everyone's painting this as a blowout. To just what you were talking about, Cade Klubnik. Let's give him a chance to grow another year as a starting quarterback. If they get better quarterback play, what can Clemson be this year?
I'm a bit nervous that they don't have Shipley. I was a big believer in Garrett Riley. I got burned by Clemson last year because I was like, oh, man, Garrett Riley coming off of that national championship game appearance with TCU. Klubnik, I believed in. I thought he should have been the starter for the majority of the season the prior year. I loved Shipley, and I'm like, oh, man, Clemson is Clemson. And then I was like, wait, hold on a second. This is not what I'm accustomed to. Their fans do not want to hear this, but Clemson is going through what every great team in the history of college football has had to go through, which is a pocket of greatness and then a period where there's going to be struggle. That's just what it is. The anomaly is what we have all, and more specifically you guys, have had to enjoy over the last 12 and 15 years with Nick Saban. That doesn't happen. Okay? That does not happen. And because those two periods coincided in terms of Clemson's, I would even say, reign and what Alabama was doing, we don't view Clemson and Dabo the way that we would have if they didn't have Alabama to compare themselves to. They had a 7-year stretch where they reached number one in the AP poll every single year. You know the only other team to do that? The great Miami teams and Alabama with Nick Saban. Right? So Clemson guys had one of the great stretches in the history of the sport for 7 years. And what do you see in the entire history of college football is that after a 7-year period like that, there's a readjustment. There's a struggle. Generally, what happens is that program, whether it's the coach or the boosters or the administration, is unwilling to adjust to the changing evolutionary nature of college football. And guess what's happened at Clemson? They have been unwilling to adjust to the evolutionary nature of college football. Dabo is unwilling to adjust to the new roster building mechanisms that we have in the sport. I think that has affected their ability to play at the top end. Georgia has not hesitated to evolve with college football. They are still at the top of the sport, and they are in the middle of their period of greatness. Who knows how long that can last? So these two programs are at a very different juncture just in terms of their lifespan. And I candidly to suggest that Clemson, listen, can Clemson win the game? Sure. Maybe they can win the game for 60 minutes. But their program is not near Georgia right now. It's just not. And that's to be expected. That's not a knock. Dabo's a hell of a coach. The program is fantastic. I feel like they'll bounce back out of this, but that's where we're at right now. I think Clemson is a team that's going to struggle, hang on to an ability to try to maybe make the playoff. Meanwhile, I think Georgia is a top 2 team in the sport.
Joel Klatt joins us.
Is that, by the way,
what?
I haven't tried that out with anybody, that kind of take. Where does that land for you guys? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's perfect because until you put it in context, I never thought of Clemson's 7-year run as one of the 3 best runs in college football history. And,
because we forget about it because it was dwarfed by what Nick was doing at Alabama.
Yeah. So
I just don't see Kirby. Kirby and Dabo are close in age. I just don't see Kirby losing his fastball that quickly.
No, yeah. I'm with you on that because that's a program that has evolved. So like think about it, guys. Like, Nebraska did not evolve schematically, fell off, and then they tried to hire some of the wrong guys. Miami did not invest in facilities when the facilities race came up. You could say the same about USC. Michigan felt like they were just going to be Michigan for everybody, but they did not evolve with the sport like they needed to, both from a facility standpoint and from a hire standpoint. Texas, Mac Brown did not evolve in terms of how to recruit, in particular from a competitive standpoint at the quarterback position. They fell off. Like, it happens. This happens in our sport, and that's what Clemson is going through right now.
Joel Klatt, Fox, it is the Big Noon Kick coming up from West Virginia and Penn State. That is 11 o'clock Central Time, obviously noon Eastern. He joins us each week, courtesy of MyBookie.ag.
Turn up the surround sound, because that's going to be the best atmosphere of the weekend.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm about to ask you about Notre Dame at Texas A&M. Probably a pretty good atmosphere there. When people like we have said on this show say nobody knows what frustrates Riley Leonard more than his former head coach Mike Elko.
Sure.
Is that a factor in this game? How big of a factor is that in this game, if so?
Well, I think it's absolutely a factor. I think that the bigger factor is Notre Dame's just a better roster. I think you guys would agree with that. I think that Notre Dame is getting Texas A&M at the perfect time. I'd much rather play them now in Mike Elko's first game rather than, be the Longhorns and have to face them late, right?
Yes.
That, and granted, with everything that comes with that game, that's I think that is a fairly obvious point. Now, having said that, because you get them early, you're going to have so much newness for Elko and that organization that a team like Notre Dame, who's really been through it, right? Like they've been through it. They're going to learn some of those lessons from losing to Ohio State. If they can win that game, guys, you look at their schedule and you're like, oh, well, that's easily a playoff team, maybe an undefeated team. That's what's wild. Like, Notre Dame's schedule is just so favorable to them. I think that they're a better team than Texas A&M, largely because of just the point in time in which they're facing them. In terms of Mike's first game, I believe that he's the right guy for the job at A&M. And by the way, I'll say this, and some have said that I'm hard on A&M. A&M, their expectations have been a bit off to what their history would tell you they are. They have been a middle-of-the-road conference team, regardless of the conference that they've been in, outside of a few seasons where there's blips in the radar and they kind of jump up. Now, having said that, they support their team from a fan base standpoint, from a booster standpoint, from a facility standpoint, from an NIL standpoint. They support their team as if it's a top 10 program, and that's what they expect. That's what they want. So no fan base, you could make a strong argument, no fan base deserves a winner more than Texas A&M in terms of the way that they've supported their program versus the results that they've been given. Those have been two things that have been polar opposites. Their results have just not married to the way that they've supported their program. I'm hoping for them and for that fan base in particular that Mike Elko is the guy that can kind of bring it all together. Jimbo was never a good fit culturally down there. Even, with the accent, I just don't think that he bought into the Aggie way, if you want to, kind of put it bluntly. And I think Elko will. And I think that's a big deal down there, a really big deal down there. The other, and I know this has nothing to do with the actual game. This idea that Trev Alberts leaves Nebraska to be the AD at Texas A&M is wild to me. Like, that's just an interesting, backstory in the back of my head.
So Sunday night in Las Vegas, I think this is fascinating because I think these programs kind of mirror each other right now. You in LSU and USC, you've got two coaches going into year 3. They haven't achieved what they wanted to. Both have played for a conference championship in year 1. Both have Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, but there's really nothing. There's a lot of meat left on the bone. You've got 2 new quarterbacks in this game. You've got 2 new defensive coordinators. I would have posted this total in the low 80s if they played last year. How improved are the defenses, and what's the biggest storyline with these two teams for you, Klatt?
Well, remember, you have 2 new defensive coordinators for 2 very different reasons, right?
Yeah. Yes.
If you're LSU, you're hoping that you can retain a level of defensive play that you feel like is common to what LSU always puts out there. If you're USC, you're praying that you can line up correctly.
Hey, Klatt,
By the way, I'm not joking. I wish I should bring my iPad up here some days and you should have seen it last year. like their schematic deficiencies. You want to know what, like, when I watch film during the week and I see things like that, I I throw things around. I'm like, what is going on? What is happening? So I do think USC's defense can expect to be much better. Maybe not great, but much better, just based on the fact that I think that they'll line up properly. I go over this, by the way, with my son's flag football teams. Do you know your basically a defense has 3 jobs, basically. Now, you can get into a lot more than this, and I'm sure defensive coaches would gruff at this, but it's really this: alignment, assignment, acceleration. That's what defenses do. If you can line up properly, know your job, and then accelerate to the football, you can play quality defense. Sorry, guys, ain't that tough. Like, offense is very intricate. You've got all sorts of stuff going on in these concepts. Defense is just not that difficult. Align, assign, and accelerate. And I think that USC will do that. Now, to answer your question more specifically about that game, I'm bullish on USC. I think LSU can be really good, but man, they lose a lot. And you could be saying like, well, hey, you're losing Caleb Williams. Yes, but the track record would suggest that it doesn't matter for Lincoln Riley. Because if you go back to what he is as a play caller, going back to his time at Oklahoma, his yards per play offense going back to 2017 or first in college football, first in college football, first in college football, 11th in college football, third in college football, sixth in college football. He is a top offense regardless of who the quarterback is. And I understand that most of those guys have been elite quarterbacks, but Miller Moss is a guy that he feels like resembles a lot of Baker Mayfield, can play within the system. He can make quality throws down the field, and that will allow them to run the football more. Last year, this is not a knock against Caleb Williams, because when you've got this type of talent, maybe you can go rogue, and he did, and that worked. But they didn't run the football as much because Caleb didn't hand it off. A lot of the run plays, remember, this is still a Mike Leach offense at its core. At its root base, it's a Mike Leach offense, which means they don't necessarily just call run plays. A lot of this stuff is RPO at the line of scrimmage. The quarterback decides when you're going to hand the football off, when you're going to throw it out to a little bubble screen, and when you're going to throw the football down the field. There's options on every single snap. Well, Caleb, he wanted the ball in his hands, and rightly so. He's a generational talent who won a Heisman Trophy, and he's the first pick in the draft. Miller Moss will run the system. And Lincoln feels like that's going to put them in more advantageous spots to run the football, be more effective on the ground, and ultimately be a quality offense, which you saw, by the way, against Louisville in the Holiday Bowl. Miller Moss threw for 6 touchdown passes. I'm giving this long dissertation to tell you, I like USC in that game. And if USC is able to win that game, you will likely see them as a 9-win team facing Notre Dame the last week of the season. And I believe if they win that, they would have a chance to go to the playoff. That's how big this game is. I know everyone's saying like, well, the games don't quite matter because you can always make the playoffs if this or that. I know you guys need a break and everything, but I'm on one. No. Like the regular season is still so important. This game is vital. Do you understand that a conference's 4th or maybe 5th entrance into the college football playoff rests on this game? The balance of whether the SEC has more teams in the playoff or the Big Ten has more teams in the playoff probably rests on USC and LSU, because those are the teams that will be vying for that 3rd or 4th spot. We don't think they're going to win their respective conferences, not with Georgia and Texas and Ohio State and Oregon out there. But if they can win that game, they can have precedent in the narrative of college football for their conference to try to get that 4th or maybe even 5th spot in the playoff for their conference. That's how big this game is week 1 of the season. I get excited about it. You got me all excited.
Oh, I love we're excited, Klatt. We got Klatt on one, and it's just week 1.
Well, we got to ask him about Deion Sanders. How has your coach gotten so soft?
Oh, wow. Straight to the point.
Wow.
I love me some Deion.
You keep asking questions like that, I'm going to ban you from the press room.
I mean, it's not the best look. I don't know the kid that was asking the questions.
It's not. Listen, I think that in one respect, like the one with the CBS guy, I know him. His name's Eric Christensen. He's a local CBS reporter. When he was like, "Oh, CBS, I'm not going to talk to you," that was out of bounds, and I think Deion knows that. The other one, though, about a reporter who all they want to do is demean and take shots and dig. I think it's well within a program's right to be like, you know what? Like, we're not going to deal with you because you're here to destruct. And that's not what's going to be beneficial for our program. Remember, Deion's job is not to be cordial to the media. Deion's job is not to do interviews. Deion's job is not to be liked by everybody in that room. His job and obligation is to the program and to the players that play for it. And so if he feels like there is a reporter that is destructive to that cause, he is well within his rights to say, one, you're not welcome, and two, we will not talk to you. I wish more guys would actually do it. I think that reporters in general have such an air of superiority and entitlement, and they're not entitled to crap. Sorry, but they're not. And maybe I'm saying we when I say they, but you better treat people with respect. You better understand nuance. And if you're just there to destruct, and if you're just there to take shots, then don't cry when you're not allowed to do so.
Yeah.
All right.
I thought it was a little too far when they changed his title from head coach to supreme leader, though. Thought that was a little too far.
Pitt State, West Virginia, 11 o'clock. The big noon kick on Fox. Thank you, Klatt. We'll see you next week.
You guys are the best. I'll talk to you soon. Next Monday. Here we go.
That's right. Next Monday.